When Major made an election promise to privatise the railways, he did so with no actual plan of how to do it. Upon winning the election, he had to rapidly put a plan together. There were differing ideas of what to do. The management of British Rail wanted the organisation to be privatised as an intact entity, effectively creating a British Rail plc. Major himself wanted to return to the grouping system, effectively reviving the Big Four. The Treasury, however, wanted the network to be carved up into 7 franchises, which would be sold to the highest bidder. The Treasury won out. Throughout the mid-90s, services were sold off piece by piece, given to whichever company promised the most. It was a chaotic process, and 7 franchises rapidly became 25, with more than 100 companies running services on the railways. Theoretically, franchises were awarded to those who had the best plan of what they aimed to do with it. In practice, they were often awarded to those who could promise the most, irrespective of whether or not they could deliver. The new franchises owned virtually nothing. Everything was leased to them for operation. The trains and rolling stock were placed under the command of 3 rolling stock leasing companies. The tracks and infrastructure were handed over to the newly formed Railtrack. The Office of the Rail Regulator was created to oversee everything, performing much the same function as the Railway Clearinghouse had once done. The level of authority it posed would fluctuate a lot with legislation changes over the years. The impact of privatisation is a hotly debated topic, with many fierce arguments on both sides. By most measurable qualities, the railways have seen a significant improvement since privatisation. Passenger numbers have been climbing steadily every year there has not been a pandemic. In proportion, it has risen more strongly than many European countries which maintain their nationalised networks. Frequency of services has increased across the country, and overall satisfaction with services has improved markedly. Opponents, however, say there is no causal link between improved performance and privatisation. The mid-90s coincided with many sociological changes, with climate change beginning to seep more into the public consciousness and road traffic well ahead of saturation point. Government policy was increasingly shifting away from building more roads and towards policies to discourage people from driving altogether, together with stronger public transport links. Rail travel rapidly became fashionable once again, particularly with young people. Many of the service improvements, policy changes and fresh new technology first began to be implemented under British Rail, with critics arguing that their impact was only just becoming widespread when privatisation happened, allowing the franchises to take credit. In fact, many improvements stalled under privatisation. Much of the coaching stock used now, for instance, has been around since the days of British Rail. The promise that privatisation would encourage long-term investment, free from short-term politics, has failed to materialise. The franchises still depend heavily on government subsidies, and they operate with the threat of being shut down should they be incapable of running services, meaning that politics now arguably plays an even closer role in how the railways are run. Another promise of the franchising system was that it would lead to stronger competition driving services forward. This has had mixed results. For competition to work, customers must have a choice. But for many, there is only one company that they can use, and this company will take full advantage of this monopoly. It is no accident that the most popular operators run in areas where there are many rivals to compete with. But even then, government subsidies eliminate much of the pressure to perform. Perhaps the biggest criticism with the franchising system is that it is too complicated, creating too many parties to be negotiated with and regulated. Whether due to privatisation or in spite of it, the 1990s was the start of a period that has been called a new golden age of rail travel. No longer an outdated relic, rail travel rapidly became exciting and fashionable once more, interest and footfall rapidly growing. The network itself was growing in size, both with reopenings and with new lines. The Robin Hood line between Nottingham and Worksop reopened in stages between 1993 and 1998, along the way linking up with Mansfield, up until then the biggest town in Britain without a train station. At the same time, new lines were being built. In London, the Jubilee line was extended to Greenwich and Stratford in 1999, greatly boosting the revitalisation of East London. Out in the suburbs, the Croydon tram link opened in 2000, bringing trams back to the capital after 48 years. The tram link connected Croydon to Wimbledon, boosting an area with no tube links. At the same time, a great tramway revival has been happening all across the country in recent years. But easily the biggest rail project of this era was the Channel Tunnel, connecting Britain and France under 50 kilometres of English Channel. The first proposal for a Channel Tunnel was brought before Napoleon in 1802. Napoleon gave it the go-ahead, believing it may be a means of invading Britain whilst bypassing the Royal Navy. Had it actually gone ahead, it would have been a truly spectacular undertaking. The longest tunnel in the world by more than 40 kilometres, and the first ever dug beneath a body of water. Over the years, several more proposals were put forward. Proposals of bridges, tunnels, and even submerged tubes suspended from floating platforms. In the 1860s, a layer of stable chalk marl was discovered beneath the channel, boosting the possibility of a tunnel. In 1880, a joint Anglo-French venture even got as far as digging experimental shafts totalling over 5 kilometres. But the unstable political situation between the two countries brought this project to a halt. Practical and political issues were shutting down all proposals for more than a century. But with better technology available and the EEC on hand to mediate and smooth over bureaucracy, the two governments were able to agree on a deal in 1987. Initial plans favoured a road tunnel, but questions arose about ventilation, traffic management, emergency response, and driver fatigue. With this in mind, a rail tunnel was agreed upon. The project cost £4.65 billion, making it the most expensive rail project ever done at this time. Construction got underway in 1988, with 5 British and 5 French companies digging from their own sides of the channel. Digging was done with huge tunnel boring machines, 8.36 metres in diameter and weighing up to 1,300 tonnes. The cutting head would cut through the rock, while systems behind automatically added in reinforcing materials and carried away all the spoilage. The French detected unstable fissures in the chalk and designed special boring machines which could work through them. The British, however, anticipated drier conditions and forged ahead with ordinary tunnelling machines. This proved a problem within a few months when the tunnel sprung a leak. The breach was rapidly sealed with grout, as were future breaches, and the British took to digging pilot shafts ahead of the main one to detect problems in advance and shore them up. At its peak, the project hired 15,000 workers, 10 of whom would die in the construction. Navigating 2 long tunnels so that they will meet within centimetres of each other is no mean feat. Careful analysis was required to keep on course, making use of satellites, sonar, and even consultations with paleontologists to ensure they were in the correct regions. Towards the end of 1990, the 2 tunnels came within a few metres of each other. On the 1st of December that year, Englishman Graham Fagg and Frenchman Philippe Cosette broke through the rock, creating the first land link between Britain and France since the Ice Age. 3 tunnels were dug in total, 2 rail tunnels with a service tunnel between them, and many connecting passages and ventilation ducts. In May 1994, the tunnel was officially opened, with the first freight services running through it 2 weeks later. In November, the first Eurostar trains left Waterloo, running the first direct service between London and Paris, soon to expand all over Western Europe. While this was going on, the franchising system was running into problems. Railtrack had been formed as a public-owned body, but in 1996, the management convinced the government that they could achieve more as a private enterprise, and so it was sold off. This was a controversial move, even among supporters of privatisation, as it gave them a monopoly over the whole network, with very little in the way of profit or competition to motivate them to greater performance. To prove their worth, they instituted an upgrade programme on the West Coast Main Line, aimed to deliver regular 225 km/h services by 2005, with innovations such as tilting trains and moving block signalling at the cost of $2 billion. In fact, the project cost $10 billion, was not complete until 2008, and could not deliver services much faster than were already running. At first, Railtrack were able to turn over a steady profit, but much of this was achieved through cost-cutting measures. Maintenance was outsourced to a number of private contractors with very little oversight. They created a hideously complex system for reporting faults and financing, supplying and scheduling repair work. Before long, maintenance and upgrades were well behind the targets agreed with the government. The Labour Party were deeply opposed to privatisation, vowing to reverse it upon return to power. But when the more centrist Tony Blair was elected in 1997, he shied away from full nationalisation. The government did, however, rein in the power of the private company somewhat. In 2000, the Office of the Rail Regulator was replaced by the Strategic Rail Authority, with more direct authority over the railways. In the same year, the public-owned Transport for London was formed to directly oversee the vast complex spiderweb of roads, buses, trains, tubes, trams, bikes and boats that ran through the capital. In particular, they took to shifting the balance of policy away from the cars and towards public transport. But the biggest shift the government made was with Railtrack. This was a direct response to a string of disasters which happened around this time. At Southall in 1997, an intercity driver missed a signal. The train collided with a freight train which was crossing its path, derailing it and killing 7 people. The signal had been installed in 1994. Many drivers had reported that it was hard to see, but nothing had been done. 2 years later at Ladbroke Grove, another intercity driver missed a danger signal. The train collided head-on with a commuter train, killing both drivers and 29 other people and injuring 417 more. Once more, the difficulty of spotting the signal was well on record, but nothing had been done. At Hatfield in 2000, inspectors on the line reported signs of fatigue in a particular rail. A replacement was ordered, but somewhere amongst the bureaucracy, the order to replace it was lost. The faulty rail was still in place 10 months later when a high-speed train went that way and the rail finally shattered, overturning the train, killing 4 people and injuring 70. These incidents brought the disorganisation of Railtrack to the forefront. When asked how many other key maintenance tasks were being similarly deferred, they had to admit they simply didn't know. Their only choice was to conduct a thorough inspection of their entire network, ordering 1,800 temporary speed limits to be brought in while the work was carried out. In many places, this was as low as 32 km an hour on main lines, crippling services. This debacle bankrupted Railtrack, and they were forced to go cap in hand to the government. Controversially, upon being bailed out, Railtrack awarded their shareholders $137 million in bonuses. A few months later, Railtrack were bankrupt once more. This time the government refused to bail them out. The company was liquidated and their assets were transferred to the newly formed public-owned Network Rail. It was hoped that a not-for-profit enterprise could succeed where Railtrack had failed. But that is a subject for next time. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And why not leave a comment to help the channel grow? There are still 2 episodes to go in this series. I am currently working on part 19, which should be with you in the next couple of months. In the meantime, why not check out the rest of the series? Or have a look at my website and my Etsy pages for more examples of my artwork. Also, please click the video link in the description for an announcement from this channel. See you soon!